Let's get right to our breaking news. A major court loss for the Trump administration. A federal judge says President Trump's use of the National Guard in Los Angeles was illegal. The judge ruling the deployment violates the Posse Comitatus Act, and he warns President Trump's calls to send troops into other American cities would amount to a national police force with the president as its chief. Before this ruling, Trump teased that Chicago is next on his list for troops. The administration is already planning to surge federal resources for immigration arrests there. Chicago's mayor has taken preemptive steps to try and rein in any federal action President Trump takes. For more on all of this, we are joined by NBC's senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley and immigration attorney Alan Orr. So Julia, what else are we hearing from this judge? How big of a deal is this ruling?
Well, it's a big ruling when you think about how Trump wants to use the National Guard next. He's already toyed with the idea of possibly sending them to Chicago, something that leaders in that state of Illinois have pushed back on, as well as the mayor of Chicago. And this is also something that we've seen in D.C., although he did have more authority. He has authority over the D.C. National Guard because of its position as the capital city. But since Trump started deploying the National Guard in L.A., which he said was to quell unrest after protests there that started because of ICE arrest, there's been a question about whether or not the president has the authority to call in the state's National Guard. Governor Gavin Newsom said he did not, and whether or not how long he can keep them there and what kind of duties they can be performing. It is against this law known as Posse Comitatus, a late 1800s law that said that the military cannot be used to enforce domestic law. It's the same reason why military can't be arresting immigrants when they cross the border. That would be enforcing a domestic law within the borders of the United States. And so in this case, this judge is saying that this was a violation to send National Guard to California. And so now that will be a big question going forward for the Trump administration. Do they continue to push? We've seen them push back court orders in the past. They will likely appeal this. And will they then decide that there is some other justification for sending National Guard to Chicago? One last thing, Anna, what was already so unusual about the idea of sending the National Guard to Chicago is they said they were doing it to crack down on crime there. That's really going a step further than what they did in Los Angeles, where they said it was to respond to unrest. The National Guard has been used in the past to respond to unrest. Sometimes that didn't go very well, like in the 70s during Vietnam protests, but it has been used in that way. And Chicago, to call them in preemptively, already raised legal questions. So after a judge is saying they weren't used correctly in California, it's unclear how the White House might pivot or if they'll change their course with the actions they have planned for Chicago.
Well, let's get that answer, if we can, from NBC News senior White House correspondent Gabe Gutierrez, who is joining us as well. What is the reaction there, Gabe, from the White House to this judge's ruling? And does it force them to change their approach to Chicago and other cities?
Well, hi there, Anna. Good morning. Well, we are still waiting that reaction from the White House. They are certainly digesting this ruling at this point. So we do not have that immediate reaction just yet. But it is unlikely, Anna, that the administration will back down on some of these other plans. They have been talking about sending federal resources to other cities, as you've been pointing out, including Chicago, Baltimore, New York City. And the president this morning even doubling down on his plans for Chicago, saying on social media that he will clean up that city if he has to. Now, the question is, Anna, how exactly will local officials continue to respond? Over the weekend, you had Chicago's Democratic Mayor Brandon Johnson signing that executive order prohibiting local resources, local police from collaborating with federal law enforcement and federal immigration officials. Now, this afternoon, we're expecting a news conference from Governor J.B. Pritzker to talk more about what might come next from his end. Right now, we do not have a timetable on when the White House may deploy additional federal resources to Chicago, but it does appear to be imminent. Over the weekend, Chicago's mayor said that he believed it would be days, not weeks, before the Trump administration deployed more resources there. And from what we understand, there was that naval base just outside of Chicago that would be used for logistical support. But again, it is unclear with this breaking news of this court ruling in Los Angeles how it will impact these plans. That's certainly a question we'll be asking the White House throughout the day on.
So, Alan, how significant is this ruling from the judge in your perspective? And what happens if the administration doesn't follow it?
I think it's very significant, and it's not just California, because it also has been resounded in D.C. about the use of these troops with regards to local laws. So it isn't so much that the president was pushed back, but that the Constitution and the way our government has always run is being upheld. And it's very significant. So the Trump administration may push, and of course, it doesn't fix the harm that has already been done by the troops or all the illegal actions that have taken place. So we're not exactly making California whole. We're just stopping a process that's in the middle of it. And the administration is likely to push back, but it's a very expensive pushback at this case because Chicago is 3 times bigger than DC, and he really has not really addressed all the crime in DC, just some of the wards in DC, not the whole area. And LA, as we've already seen on this network, is only a couple of streets, not really the main of all of LA. So this concept that the National Guard is going to be a supplant for police forces in local government is not a positive result for us. It's costly. The National Guard is away from their jobs, which is costing other companies money and our readiness for military readiness. And it's also just not a good look.
Well, and of course, in D.C., it's a little bit different because the president has some authority over the National Guard there. We're not talking about a more sovereign state or a city within a different state like we're seeing with L.A. in California or Chicago and Illinois. Julia, do we have any sense of a timeline for Chicago? Could this ruling hold that operation up when we're talking about moving in the immigration crackdown that you've mentioned?
I don't think it'll stop the immigration crackdown, Anna. We know that Border Patrol is already working to set up a naval base just north of the city as a staging area where we understand that some federal agents from ICE, Border Patrol, and DOJ components like ATF and DEA can sleep as they're surged into this city. We know at least 200 agents have already been tapped to go, and we expect more. Now, National Guard was supposed to support that mission as well as an overall crackdown on crime in Chicago. So the crime operation could be put on hold. We'll have to wait and see what Gabe gets and what the White House says about this ruling. But as far as immigration, they can continue to surge the resources of federal agents there and do more arrests and even try to go into areas where they may have targets for the worst of the worst, or do things like what we saw Border Patrol do in Los Angeles, where they were doing sweeps of Home Depot parking lots, even though that was also ruled illegal by a judge. They still went through and continued to do that, even coming out of a rental truck in a Home Depot parking lot after that ruling. So I don't know that this will do much of a dent in terms of the immigration operation there. Certainly the optics may be changed if they don't have National Guard there to support those missions. But as far as I'm hearing so far, DHS is still pushing lots of resources into Chicago to arrest immigrants there.
And Alan, as Gabe mentioned just a few minutes ago, Chicago's mayor, Brandon Johnson, signed an executive order directing the city to use every legal mechanism to combat Trump's actions, and that includes demanding federal officers follow city regulations like using body cameras, banning the use of masks by officers, barring city officers from collaborating with military or on immigration enforcement, and directing city agencies to submit Freedom of Information Act requests. Do you see this constraining what the administration can do on the ground compared to surges in other cities?
Absolutely not, because there's actually 2 different forms. It's federalism. It's the separation of federal and state powers. And we've already seen this operate in California. But we should also realize that you can't deport your way out of this immigration system problem that we have. We're just treating the symptoms. We're not really addressing the problems. So what if this administration deports 1 million people and they say there's 11 million people here, and they do one every year, so that's 4 million people out of the rest that remain? That doesn't solve the immigration fix. Congress, which is back in session today, could fix this problem. And when immigration enforcement is just about numbers, we see this problem. And the expense of this, we're seeing it in our colleges right now with foreign students not coming back. We're seeing it in tourism, where people aren't coming to this country to spend their money and the dollars anymore. And we're also seeing the National Guard in D.C. pick up trash and do lawn work. That's very expensive cost to the taxpayer. And it isn't the Trump's money that's spending, it's the taxpayers' money from these different states that's being wasted and costing us so much money. Even with the removal of 1.5 million people who said they voluntarily left, it's crippling our economy. So we really need to address the system through immigration reform and not remove the 60 to 70% of the people whose only problem is being here undocumented. If we want to talk about illegal actions, if the Trump administration does something against the court, that's an illegal action. So if we want to do things the legal way, let's be legal on all counts.